Since you're watching this video, I can guess at least a couple of things. First, you're interested in climbing Kilimanjaro in Africa, or trekking to Everest Base Camp in Nepal, or going to some other high altitude destination. Second, you have seen a bunch of videos in which people talk about the day-by-day sights and scenes on the trail, and they give you a packing list. Well, this is not that kind of video. I'm Tim Garrett, and I'm an ER doctor. I've climbed Kilimanjaro and I've trekked to Everest Base Camp. I'm going to tell you about what I needed to know and do to stay healthy on the trail. In other words, I want to help you get there and not die. Before we get started, this video contains my opinions, and they are just that, opinions. They do not take the place of treatment or advice from your own doctor, especially if you have chronic medical conditions or illnesses that would affect your performance and safety on these strenuous treks. So before deciding to tackle this kind of trek or anything similar, go see your doctor. Now, don't let anyone fool you. Trekking to Everest Base Camp and climbing Kilimanjaro are not easy. The EBC trail is 80 miles round trip. It is rocky, and many times it is very steep. Also, you reach altitudes up to 5,545 meters, or almost 18,200 feet. The summit of Kilimanjaro is 19,341 feet, or 5,895 meters above sea level, and the last leg of the climb that we started at midnight the night before we summited is the single most strenuous thing I've ever done in my life. At the same time, these treks can be done by anyone in reasonably good health who has the time needed to complete the trip. There are no technical climbing skills needed for either EBC or Kilimanjaro. You simply have to be able to walk. In this episode, I'm going to tell you how I physically and mentally prepared for the trek and whether what I did was enough. Hey, it's Doc, and I'm back home in the Rockyard studio from the EBC trek. I made it, and I have the sweatshirt to prove it. However, I have to be honest with you. If I had not trained my body and my mind beforehand, I would not have been able to summit Kilimanjaro or to make it to Everest Base Camp. So let's go through some of the questions that I get from people who are interested in how I trained and successfully completed my treks. First off, people ask, when should I begin training? I would say at least several months, ideally a year. And this gives you time to gradually increase the length and intensity of your training. However, it's important to remember that over this time frame, you can't push yourself too much. The last thing that you want is to injure yourself and to not be able to go on the trek at all. One of the good things about starting your training early is that you give yourself time to heal if you do suffer a training injury. But you might ask, well, what if it's already only a few weeks before I'm going on my trek? In most cases, that's okay. Just start now to do some training. Again, taking care to not get injured. If you're in reasonably good shape, then you will find that even a few weeks of training will be enough. So I get asked, what kinds of physical training should I do? Well, let me go through a couple of different ones. First off is strength training. Strength training with weights or with body weight only, it helps to build up the strength and endurance of your thigh and calf muscle, which really helps with this type of trekking. Hamstring and glute exercises like squats and Romanian deadlifts helps with the muscles that you use in climbing up a trail. And then quadriceps exercises like squats, lunges, and leg extensions helps with the downhill parts. Upper body and core exercises are also very important in this type of trek. Of course, you're using your upper body in carrying the backpack and in using poles. And then your core muscles really help, one, with the walking and climbing that you're going to be doing, but also with balance. And also remember that strength training is not just a muscle builder. It also helps your cardiovascular endurance, especially if you do high intensity interval training. I will say, for me, strength training was the secret ingredient that made me successful on the treks. Walking and running is also important. It should be no surprise that one of the best ways to prepare for a walking trek is to walk. I walked at least a mile most days at the park near my home in the months leading up to the trek. Many days I walked 2 or more miles. I also added days in which I did a long walk of 10 to 15 miles. You know, a key component of walking for me was to vary the length and the pace of the walk. It helped my body to adjust better to the strains of walking at altitude. Running can also add some different intensity level to your training. The important point, though, is to not injure yourself. Just think how disappointing it would be to have to cancel your trip because you tore your meniscus in your knee a couple of weeks before your trek was scheduled to begin. Not something that you want to have to do. Long hikes are also important. In addition to walking in the park, I had several long shakedown hikes in the mountains a couple hours from my home. These hikes gave me the chance for training on long uphill rocky trails that were similar to the ones that I encountered in Tanzania and in the Himalayas. These long hikes, especially in hilly areas, can also give you an opportunity to test out any new gear like day packs or hiking poles, and to break in any new boots or clothing. You know, I get asked a lot, do I need to train at high altitudes? If you have the ability to do some hiking at altitudes of 5,000 feet or 1,500 meters above sea level or higher, then you should take the opportunity to do so. You know, hiking at altitude helps you get used to walking in lower oxygen environments. And if the time at altitude is long enough and is close enough to your trek, you may even get a head start on acclimatizing to the high altitude that you're going to encounter on the trek. Now, if you don't have easy access to high altitudes, that's okay. I didn't do any of that kind of training before my treks, and it really didn't seem to hold me back that much. So people ask me, so if I've trained my body well, then that's all I need, right? Well, what I would say is that in addition to strength training, another secret weapon that I had was the mental preparedness that I worked on. Now, what do I mean by that? You know, your legs might be adequately trained to complete the trek. If, however, your mind says, there is no way I can climb that next mountain, then your physical training will have been for nothing. I spent a few of my times in the mountains near my home working on mental preparedness. What I would do is purposely walk very quickly up and down the trail, over hills and ridges and even mountains, until I was very, very tired. By this point, I was several miles away from my vehicle. I was then forced to walk back over those same hills and ridges and mountains, even though I was exhausted. Doing this allowed at least a couple of things. First, I had that feeling of exhaustion in my mind and in my muscle memory, so that that feeling would not be a surprise when I was on the trek. You know, I would think, I've been here before. I have felt exhausted before. I know I can make it. Second, I was able to change my mindset so that when I saw an uphill section around the next bend, I actually had a feeling of excitement because I knew that I was getting closer and closer and closer to my destination every time I was going uphill. So speaking of mental topics, watch for an upcoming episode of Get There Not Die that tells the story of how I kind of lost it after I reached the summit of Kilimanjaro. You are not going to want to miss that episode. I hope my experience in getting ready for high altitude trekking will help you to do the same. Now, please leave any comments that you want to share with everyone in the space below. And tune in again so that we can continue talking about how to get there and not die.